Hello everybody, it is I, Stippling Vaughn, and I'm at my local dive bar. You can see the other side of the booth. And I told you guys that today I'd be starting that new Star Wars piece, and here it is. This is my Star Wars piece. This is like all the side characters from when Marvel Comics had the original licensing rights with George Lucas to do Star Wars comics. What it was is that Star Wars and Star Wars, the Empire Strikes Back was issues 38 through 44, okay? And after that, they did a couple, I would say, inventory stories or fluff stories, because they kind of almost had to reset the whole comic book to accommodate everything with the Return of the Jedi. More importantly, before Return of the Jedi, Star Wars really was, it was just like these ragtag stories. There really wasn't just any cohesion to what was being told. It's like, oh, well, put them on a water planet, do this with them, do that with them. And it was just like a lot of dealing with space pirates. A lot of it had an old school Flash Gordon feel to the books. You take a look. I mean, they had Al Williamson doing Empire Strikes Back. Before that, they had Carmine Infantino doing a lot of the artwork for Star Wars. And I personally wasn't a huge fan of Star Wars prior to prior to Empire Strikes Back. Now, while I wasn't a huge fan of the movie, I'm still not. I mean, I am in the minority. Okay, I am not a huge fan of The Empire Strikes Back. And I think part of it was because what got me into Star Wars was all the imagination, the creatures and everything, and I didn't get that with Empire Strikes Back. It just, I mean, yeah, it was a straightforward story, but for me it was one of those where it's like, I want more of the, it just ended, in my opinion. There was no conclusion. It was just an ending. And I didn't care for that. So, but what saved Star Wars for me, made me a huge fan, was they had material to work with after Empire Strikes Back. Okay. Oh, by the way, if you're new and you're watching for the first time, please give me a like, give me a subscribe, comment and subscribe. If you think I'm full of shit, leave in the comments. I won't know until you give me a comment. So anyway, but no, after the Empire Strikes Back, they did about, I guess it was 45 through 50. They were a series of one-off stories. Really, just you could tell almost that they were resetting, doing a reset, trying to get stuff in. But because of because of Empire Strikes Back, they had material now to work with. Okay, they understood what Luke's purpose was. Even though they didn't have, they had to, and here's the biggest thing: they had to overcome the challenges. They didn't have the Han Solo. They couldn't use Han Solo because he was in carbonite. But they'd introduced enough characters in Empire that even if they couldn't use that specific character, they could create other characters as proxy to tell these stories that would be enough for them to convey and continue the adventures, but they didn't have to worry about whether George Lucas would approve of it or not, because, well, I have plans for that character in the long run, so I can't have you doing that. So it gave them so in turn they created a lot of other characters. One of the characters they created was this one right here. When they had this is Domina Tague, and she was the sister of Baron Tague, Ormond Tague. Ormond Tague was kind of like a warlord type character in in the Star Wars comic before Empire Strikes Back. And in it, he fights Luke, but then I believe he ends up falling to Vader, and Vader destroys him. So she wants revenge on the rebels. Okay, so that was the kickoff of issue 50, which then after issue 50, it really gave them a sense of like where to go. Okay, first story arc is we've now established that the rebels are hiding in bases, and the Hoth base has been destroyed. We got to find We got to find the rebels a new base. So we have that going on. Then on top of that, okay, we have these bounty hunters. So we can now have these adventures of tracking down these bounty hunters to find out where Han has been taken. Has he been taken to Jabba the Hutt or not? Because you got to keep in mind, Jabba the Hutt hadn't been created, and of course, George had specific mandates. Like, no, you can't mention Jabba at all, because even though he was mentioned in the first movie, I can't have you using him because I don't have my vision of him created yet. So again, they had to come up with stories, and I thought that they did a great job with it. And it ended, and they took the idea of all these different stories, and they led it all the way up to Return of the Jedi, where they have to get the Bothan tapes. And in the Star Wars comic, they had it where a rebel pilot had the tapes, and he had the plans for the second Death Star, and he hid him in his protocol droid Ellie. And Luke and Leia discover this, and they meet Ellie first, but Ellie is under strict programming not to reveal who she is. So they just think of her as just a protocol droid. C-3PO is somewhat enamored for a droid over her. And in the end, she then blows herself up so that no one can get a hold of her master, the rebel pilot, who is in a catatonic death state. So Luke and Leia then leave the planet that's under heavy rebel or heavy Imperial control. And this right here is Ellie. Ellie was modeled after after Ralph McQuarrie's first envisioning of what C-3PO would look like. So I've included her here also. And this here is where I have fun. So I've got Danny here with one of the Who Jibs, and then I have a Lasby, and then I've got Danny's two cohorts in crime. So I'll be working on this down here when I do my time-lapse video. It's easier when I'm doing a time-lapse video to do like here and here. Like pretty much the left side is easier to work on with the time-lapse videos as opposed to the right side. That's the reason why I'm always focused on the right side with doing these videos where I'm talking to you. So, but, okay. So, what I always found interesting, I discovered this from talking to comic book creators at the shows, is that during this period from like issue 45 through, I want to say through 50, those were fluff pieces. But what I discovered also was that issue 53 and 54 were, remember, Marvel at the time, or they had around that time, they'd had the licensing rights to do John Carter, Warlord of Mars. The comic book ended, but they still had those stories, so they just put put them in the drawer. Then what they did was they I guess probably most likely to get them on track with with everything they're going to do. They needed some monthly book. Okay, here's some old John Carter stories. Okay, take a staff writer or staff artist, draw over it. Make this Leia, make this Luke, make these guys the stormtroopers. Discovered that from Walt Simonson, because Walt Simonson told me that was the reason why. And if you look at issue 54 and 53, why are the stormtroopers so big in the story? It's because it was a John Carter Warlord of Mars story originally, and they just pulled it out, reworked it, so that way they had the story for to use in Star Wars. Same thing goes with issue 64. Dave Michelini, I had him sign that issue, and the reason why I had him sign it was because nobody who worked on the book had worked on anything else, as far as I could tell. And I told him, and the whole reason why I had him sign that specific book, not because it was great, well, because I had so many issues before that and after it already signed, that I wanted it signed so that I'd have a full run of books that were signed. Same thing as with like last year when Ann Nessetti was at Baltimore. I had her sign all the issues of Star Wars at the end, where all she was the editor, and I had her sign those, so that way the entire run from like basically issue 50, like basically issue 50 through 107 are now completely signed. I wanted them all signed. It had nothing to do with like, oh, this is going to be worth money now because they're all signed. No, it's because it's my collection. I love Star Wars and I want them all signed. So, but no. So here he told me that issue 64 of Star Wars was another inventory story for another book. Here it was originally a story for the comic book Battlestar Galactica, and when it was canceled, they still had the book. So what they do? They just throw it in the file, throw it in the inventory file, and then they came across where it's like, well, we need a fluff piece. We need an inventory story so we can get back on track. Okay, we got this Battlestar Galactica story. Use that, rework it so that way we can reuse it. So, I found that very interesting that back then they had the forethought of like, okay, this story, we can't use it, we have the license rights. They had a complete story. I mean, think about it, they don't have the ability to do that anymore. They run them, both these companies, Marvel and DC, run by themselves by the skin of their teeth so much, they can't even afford to have inventory stories in the drawer ready to go if they need it. That's pretty sad. It just shows how far those two companies have fallen, that they can't even have an inventory story ready to go. So now, last night I was on the chat and I took part in my very first Nessa Peace Theater, which was basically Stat and Mrs. Stat house hunting, and I enjoyed it so much. I can see why when what Shane does it a lot, and he does it with Ballers with Mandy, and they'll have it where they're watching a video and it's like wait, and then it's like one of those ones like, he grabbed her ass. Did you see that? He grabbed her. And it's one of those like, you're just making shit up as you go along just to provide commentary for what you're seeing, and it's like completely out of context. And I had so much fun doing that. I had so much fun with Stat and Mrs. Stat shopping for their second home over in England. It was so much fun, and I hope Vanessa does more of those stories, or does more Nessa Peace Theater. I loved it. I'd love to do more of them. I can understand why these creators do that. It's entertaining for us, but it's very entertaining for them. Honestly, I would love to be on stream with Shane doing one of those, because he does. He goes completely. He throws all of his imagination in, and like different, like you're just throwing shit against the wall and see what sticks as a bit, as a joke. So I enjoyed it a lot, and I'd love to do that again. So afterwards, I was kind of bouncing around, seeing what else was there, and Pete Sametti was on the stream. Pete Sametti was he was interviewing Nerdrotic, and I didn't catch a lot of it. I only caught a snippet of it. It was when they hit the 2-hour mark, and they're like, okay, let's just add we'll do another 20 minutes, and then we'll end the show. And he basically said to Nerdrotic, if you had a magic wand and you could reset, or almost reset the Marvel Universe, what would you do? And I only caught the beginning of it, but he's absolutely right with what he was saying. And the thing is that what he's saying is the same things everyone else is saying. And it gets me how we're all saying the same thing, but yet Marvel can't be wrong, because they're a big company and they're part of Disney now. They can't admit they're wrong. And again, I bring this up. You remember a couple months ago, I was using the analogy of, the analogy I was using was Exxon, when they had the Exxon oil spill, and how the company handled it so poorly because they just didn't own up to it. They kept sending like low-level executives to handle the situation, and it just got worse and worse for them. First, they went into denial. Then, when they had to acknowledge that they were having low-level employees handle all the press, and it just got worse and worse for them. Whereas with Johnson & Johnson, when they had a scare, the head of the company became the face of the company to lead them through that issue. Remember, the whole issue is that people were dying from cyanide poisoning, and here it turned out there was a woman was wanting to. She murdered her husband, but she tampered with a bunch of Tylenol bottles. So that way he was just one of the victims, and she was like, "Oh, my poor husband," here when she was the murderer. Okay, and so I see again the problem that we have with these big businesses is you when you do something wrong, okay, remember, regular people, not the extremes. Regular people are very forgiving, okay? The best thing for Marvel to do is say, look, our sales have gone through the floor. We acknowledge that the reason why is we've completely gone so far off the rails from what the original characters were all about, that we need to completely our course correct. How we're going to do that is we're just going to restart the whole Marvel Universe fresh. Kind of like how when they did the Ultimate line. And we'll go from there. And we'll update everything. Because remember, when comic books first were created, I think it was like Dell or Charleston, they admitted that they'd only manufacture 5 years worth of comics, and at the end of the 5 years, they just start reprinting them all over again, because by then the audience had grown out of them. So I see that as okay. We've destroyed everything to the point where we just have to restart everything and just go from there. And you think about it, in some ways they did that with the Ultimate Marvel, and it was good. A lot of people liked it because it was just basically taking what was there over the last 50 years and then just retooling it for a more modern audience. You take a look at it. Miles Morales really isn't that bad of a character. He was successful in the Ultimate Universe. It's just when they decided, oh, we gotta bring him part of the mainstream universe. You didn't. You should have just kept him in the separate universe. And again, it comes down to whereas like Shane lots of times brings it up. And remember, his Xen book is available to be backed right now. I'm very interested in that book. I know I'm going to be backing it. On top of that, he's got a sketchbook of all of his past work of sketches, production work. So that's definitely something that's on my radar. But no, Shane talks about how the marketing department looks at it like we gotta have an event so it's easier to market our books. Well, take a look at your sales. That method of doing it, of selling your books, isn't working anymore. Okay, everybody's caught on, nobody's buying your books now. Okay, so you're better off going back to, instead of having all of the titles interacting with each other, go back to what was successful. Just focus on doing a Spider-Man book. Okay, what's wrong with doing a bunch of standalone issues? If you do 5 to 10 standalone issues, you can still reproduce it in a trade paperback form. Or what's even better is because once you have those 10 issues, you can reproduce them however you want. Even if it's one of those where it's like you can use them in any order because they're not in order because they're standalone stories. So I think Nerdrotic and even everything Nerdrotic was saying, it goes right along the lines of a lot of like creators like Shane says. The two of them are very similar in their outlook. They present the information differently, but they're saying the same thing, and they're very loud voices within the community of comic books. So, but no, I think Nerdrotic and Shane are exactly on the same page. So now, discovered something also last night. Miss Stippling came home from talking to her friends, and they put their down deposit on that in June we are going to Myrtle Beach. Now, Myrtle Beach for me, the reason why I'm excited about this is that coast along Myrtle Beach is the Mecca of lighthouses in the south. There's like 5 lighthouses right along that stretch, and I am already like, oh. I mean, for me, it's one of those where it's like, you go to church, I'm going to a lighthouse. Okay, that is where I find my religion, because it's when it's like you look the beauty and the grace, and then when you know the history of lighthouses and the lighthouse keepers. Lighthouse keepers, you have to keep in mind, they are the original definition of a first responder. Okay, when the storm's brewing and everybody's battening the windows and the doors, and they're bracing for the storm along the coast, lighthouse keepers go to work. It's their job to protect the coastline from the ships so that the ships don't bash along the rocks. It's their job that if there is a ship in duress, for them to organize with the coastal life-saving services to mount a rescue for those people who are at risk of life. I've always, I want to say over this last decade, since about 2011, I've become very interested in lighthouses let's put it this way. When it comes to lighthouses, I get really close to being on the spectrum. Where I used to be, where it's like I knew every goddamn thing about superheroes, a lot of that stuff is now starting to be purged from my brain because this is where it's at. For me, it's like this, okay? Lighthouses and lighthouse keepers is a subculture of Americana. And I enjoy it so much when I get a chance to learn about lighthouses and the history of the lighthouses and the lore. And it's just, again, lighthouse keepers are akin to first responders. In many ways also, you could say lighthouse keepers are very similar to comic book artists, okay? Many comic book artists are, I don't want to say aloof, but they are awkward in public because they're not accustomed to interacting with others, okay? Lighthouse keepers are the same. They are very isolated individuals. There were stories of certain lighthouse keepers that because they had the foghorns, and the foghorns would go off at regular intervals, after they'd retire or when they go into town, they were so accustomed to those foghorns going off that they'd be in the middle of a sentence and they'd pause. It was like they automatically would have like this dramatic pauses in the middle of a sentence when it wasn't necessary, but because they were so accustomed to this is when the foghorn goes off. No one can hear you when you're talking. When a foghorn goes off, you just automatically stop talking. So I find stuff like that to be very fascinating. So, and I know it'd be easy, like, well, why are you doing a horror comic if you have such great love for lighthouses? I think part of it is because I go too far. Like, as soon as I start to get involved with lighthouses and learn about lighthouses, it bogs my brain down. I can't think creatively. If someone could come up with a awesome lighthouse story, or a story that revolves around a lighthouse or a lighthouse keeper, I'd be all in. Because I can draw people and I can draw lighthouses to my heart's content. I would love it. And there's so many amazing stories with lighthouses. So, but I know a lot of these people, a lot of you guys are tuning in because I did a hashtag of Star Wars, which is probably bringing a lot of views. So I apologize, and if you're still watching, I'll be doing more videos on this. And what's nice about this actually is you're going to be able to see how the artwork comes along, how the pencils come along, and then how the inks come along. Because this is the piece I'll be working on for a while when I'm not working behind the scenes with my own book, Scat Investigators. So you guys have a great day. Remember, don't watch a football game at home. Go out to a bar and make a new friend, because guess what? You're going to discover that even though that they're not rooting for your team and they're shit talking you because of your team, at the end of the day, you're going to find out you got a lot more in common with them than you expect. But remember, life is stressful. Just take it all one dot at a time.